The Glock 20 is not the ultimate backcountry defense handgun. We'll find out on today's episode of Rough Shot Outdoors. Howdy folks, and welcome back to Rough Shot Outdoors. Now, there seems to be a lot going on online talking about is a 10mm automatic the ultimate backcountry defensive pistol. And it comes down to, I mean, in my opinion, it's not. You know, depending on what you're doing, if you're hiking or if you're hunting, you generally have a rifle. So that's going to be your first line of defense against a brown bear or a grizzly. And so generally, you know, it's real subjective what it comes down to. But so if you're hunting, generally your handgun's going to be if you're quartering a moose or an elk, something like that. Black bear, you might be following up a wounded black bear, and they will charge. I actually know an outfitter in Minnesota who they followed up a wounded black bear and it charged. And nobody got hurt, but it could have ended badly. So there's that. One thing, you know, a lot of people like to dote on the Glock, and I think they're all right. You know, but a lot of people love the fact that they hold 15 rounds in the magazine. Well, the way a Glock comes out of the box is what I like to call a spray and pray weapon. They are not designed for precision of any kind. I like to say the reason they hold 15 is because you need that many to maybe get 3 hits. Which for the average shooter that doesn't shoot that much, that has a 9-to-5 job, they don't shoot that much, and they are probably not going to be proficient. Now, if you put a laser on here, yeah, that's going to help a lot. You put aftermarket sights on, an aftermarket trigger. The trigger, I think, the stock trigger is one of the things that can make them so inaccurate. I think the average person just having with a semi-automatic platform tends to just spray and pray more than someone with a double action or single action revolver. That is kind of what my whole theory is on using a semi-auto versus a big bore revolver. This one, I have actually, another thing with these require more maintenance than a revolver. You know, you need to clean these. That is pretty important. Now, I've gone, you know, shot a couple hundred rounds without cleaning it, and then took it apart, and the carbon buildup is bad. Actually, once was just out shooting some 180 grain hollow points, practicing a little bit, and I'd squeeze the trigger, wouldn't go off. So I would rack the slide, squeeze the trigger, wouldn't go off. And I was looking at the primers on the cartridges, and they weren't dented or anything, you know. I think I went, what is going on? And so then I kind of was watching the slide, and it kind of would move forward. And I was like, what? That's weird. So I, racked it again, and now this is a Glock. So, well, I don't want to probably get censored if I do it on camera, but I pulled the trigger and watched the slide forward just a little bit. But I'm like, okay, that is odd. So I took it apart, couldn't find anything wrong, put it back together and dumped the mag. Worked. So that, I think it could, if it was dirty, that could have been the reason that happened. So, if that were to happen in a scenario where, you had a bear attacking you, you basically have nothing. So, while I don't want to be too hard on the Glock because it's probably the most popular carry sidearm in Alaska and probably the Western United States, I don't think it is the best choice. Is it better than a rock? Sure. But when it comes down to just a stock, out of the box Glock, and this is a Gen 4. These are supposed to be the best ones they ever made. According to some. I guess that can be subjective, but from what you hear from a lot of people, they say the Gen 4s were the best. But just out of the box, they're not an accurate weapon in the hands of the average shooter. Now, obviously, a bear attack's not going to happen at 20 yards. It's, maybe you'll get your first couple shots off. But if they're that close, I want something a little more powerful, like the 454 Casull. 44 mag. And really, a 44 mag is not that difficult to shoot with practice. I know everybody says you can't get back on target, you can't. It's pretty tough to get back on target with a 10 millimeter. To be honest, before you start banging away, and that's why you need 15 bullets. I kind of feel like in today's day and age, in the time of high capacity magazines, which I have no problem with, AR-15s, 30 round magazines, which I don't have a problem with that. It's just that the average shooter has replaced accuracy and precision with magazine capacity. And that is where my mindset, that is what it seems like most people do. Now, has the 10 millimeter been used successfully against bears? Oh yes, many times. It will continue to be used successfully against charging bears of all colors for a long time because it's so popular. But popularity doesn't always mean it's the best. There was a guy, Wyoming or Montana, a couple years ago, the guide. The client had shot an elk. They were gutting it out, quartering it, got attacked by a grizzly. And the guide was getting mauled, and I don't quite remember all the details, but I think he had a Glock 20, and the client somehow got it. It might not have been a Glock because it might have been a Smith & Wesson or could have been a 1911 too. But the client couldn't figure out how to get the safety off, which now a Glock doesn't have a safety really, or doesn't have a manual safety. I mean, it's basically a safe system. But if you can't figure out how to shoot a Glock, you're hopeless. Shoot a Glock accurately, that's a different story. But just to get rounds off, you're hopeless if you can't figure it out. Because literally all you have to do is point it, squeeze the trigger. There is no manual safety that you need to take off. Obviously, that little thing right there, you got to push down. And it's such a big, long, heavy trigger. I think that's why, or not long, it's just such a heavy trigger, I think, is what makes them inaccurate. But back to that story, the client couldn't figure out how to use the weapon. I think he threw it either at the bear or just in the brush and took off running. The guide ended up passing away. So, there's that theory too, that, if you don't know how to use it, obviously it ain't gonna work. But when it comes down to it, I really would recommend, for especially Alaska, it says it's a sidearm. It's not your not supposed to be your main line of defense, especially if you're hunting. That your rifle is then. Even if you're hiking, a lot of people carry shotguns with slugs, or 45-70s. Now, 45-70, not just any old run-of-the-mill, off-the-shelf 45-70 is going to work. Same with any pistol caliber cartridge. So, it is very subjective. You got to do, research. 10 millimeter hardcast is really good. 220 grain buffalo bore, Underwood. Those 200 grain Hornady DGH backcountry what do they call it? Backcountry defense. I've actually been quite impressed with what I've seen from it so far. At least for shooting into boards and shooting over the chronograph. So, but for Alaska, the average shooter, I would recommend 44 Magnum for their backup. If you don't have a whole lot of, if you don't really want to spend the money on a 44, or you might already have a Glock, it'll work, especially if you're a client and you got a guide. Alaskan guides are, for the most part, gonna take care of it for you. But if you're DIY or DIY, whatever, I would recommend 44 Magnum. I don't recommend 45 Colt, because 45 Colt you buy off the shelf is pretty wimpy. It's almost like a 410 shot shell. Now, if you're a reloader and you know the gun you have, like I have a Ruger Nubicaro, that's a mid-frame. So I can't shoot the real tier 3, the real hot tier 3 load 45 Colt. You can buy that from, there's a couple different manufacturers that make it. Buffalo Bore, I think Grizzly Cartridge does. Double Tap probably makes some crazy tier 3 loads. I don't think anyone makes a tier 2 load commercially. So that's why I don't recommend 45 Colt. If you're a hand loader, you know what gun you have, a Blackhawk, large frame Blackhawk, preferably with the Vistly grip, then you can go into the 45. But again, it all comes down to practice, and that's the biggest thing. And most people don't or can't practice enough to become proficient, especially with one of these. So that's why I would recommend 44 mag. This video got to be long, and I got it to be a little windy, and I apologize about that, but that'll be today's video. I'm Pete Refshaw with Refshaw Outdoors. Keep your powder dry.